I'm sitting here at 58 years old, and I'm about to tell you something that'll make your blood run cold. Something I never thought would happen to a guy like me. I trusted my wife completely for 25 years, and she played me like a damn fool. But here's the thing. When I finally figured it out, I made sure she paid for every single lie. My name's Charlie Pierce. I worked at Bethlehem Steel Mill for 32 years as a plant supervisor. The mill sits on 200 acres of industrial land outside Pittsburgh, with smokestacks that you can see from 20 miles away. I spent most of my adult life in that maze of furnaces, conveyor belts, and machinery that never stops roaring. Good job, steady paycheck, the kind of work that builds America. The plant floor was my second home. I knew every piece of equipment, every safety protocol, every worker by name. I was looking forward to retirement next year, maybe buying that fishing boat I'd been dreaming about. Helen and I had it all planned out, or so I thought. Helen's my wife, was my wife. 54 years old, been selling real estate for 15 years. Her office sits in one of those modern glass buildings downtown, all marble floors and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river. Started small, showing starter homes to young couples, but the last few years she'd been doing really well. Big houses in the suburbs, commercial properties, luxury condos. She'd come home to our two-story colonial on Maple Street talking about these million-dollar deals, and I was proud of her. Proud that my girl had made something of herself in a business dominated by smooth talkers and people born with silver spoons. We've got 3 kids. Michael's 28, works in construction management for a big firm downtown. Patricia's 25, she's a dental hygienist at the practice near the mall. Dennis is 23, just graduated from Penn State with a business degree. Good kids, all of them. Or so I thought about Michael, anyway. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. It started about 6 months ago when I hurt my back at the plant. Nothing serious, just lifted a piece of equipment wrong and threw out my lower back. But the company doctor said I needed to take it easy for a few weeks. They put me on modified duty, which meant I was sitting behind a desk instead of walking the plant floor, and I was getting home by 4 p.m. instead of my usual 6:30. That's when I started noticing things that had probably been going on for months. Helen had always worked weekends, showing houses to clients. Real estate never sleeps, she'd say, especially when you're dealing with people who work Monday through Friday jobs. But lately she'd been having these special client meetings that seemed to happen every Saturday afternoon like clockwork. She'd spend extra time getting ready. I'm talking full makeup, perfume, the works, just to meet some client at a coffee shop or whatever. She'd leave our house around 1 p.m. and wouldn't get back until 5 or 6. Seemed odd to me that she'd get all dolled up for a business meeting. But what did I know about selling houses? Our house has been the same for 15 years, minus 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, decent kitchen that Helen remodeled about 5 years ago. My favorite spot has always been the garage, where I keep my tools and work on projects. Helen's domain was the home office we set up in what used to be the spare bedroom. She had her real estate license on the wall, a big desk with 2 computer monitors, filing cabinets full of contracts and property listings. That's where she'd spend most evenings supposedly working on deals and following up with clients. Then there was the phone thing. Helen had always been attached to her phone, part of the business, she said. Clients called at all hours wanting to see properties or ask questions about financing. But now she was acting weird about it. She'd take it with her to the bathroom, keep it face down during dinner, and if it buzzed while we were watching TV on the couch, she'd jump like she'd been shocked. When I asked her about it, she'd just say it was work stuff and change the subject real quick, but what really got my attention was the money. See, Helen had always handled our finances. I brought home my paycheck from the steel mill. She managed everything else, the mortgage, utilities, credit cards, savings. Made sense. She was good with numbers, and I never had much interest in that stuff. I trusted her completely. But when I started thinking about retirement and what our financial situation looked like, I figured I should probably take a closer look at our accounts. What I found sitting at her desk that Tuesday afternoon didn't make sense. Our checking account had way more money than it should have. My supervisor's salary was decent, around $85,000 a year, but nothing spectacular. Helen's commission checks from the real estate company were good when she had a busy month, maybe $8,000 or $10,000, but nothing that would explain the extra cash floating around. When I asked her about it over dinner that night in our kitchen, she said she'd been getting bonuses for high sales volume. Again, what did I know about how real estate commissions worked? The thing that really set me off was finding a second cell phone in her car. I was looking for jumper cables in her Honda's trunk one Saturday morning when she was in the shower. She always parked in the driveway while I kept my truck in the garage. There it was, hidden in the spare tire, well, a cheap prepaid phone, the kind you see in movies when people are up to no good. That night, I couldn't sleep. Our bedroom felt different somehow, like I was sharing it with a stranger. I kept thinking about all the little things that had been bugging me over the past few months. The late meetings, the secretive phone calls, the mystery money, that hidden phone. My gut was telling me something was wrong, but my brain kept saying, Charlie, you're being paranoid. This is Helen we're talking about. 25 years of marriage, 3 kids together. But then I remembered something my old man used to say back when he worked the coal mines in West Virginia. Son, when someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. Helen was showing me something, and I'd been too trusting to see it. Too comfortable in my routine of work, home, weekend football games on the couch. So I did something I never thought I'd do in my entire life. I hired a private investigator, guy named Vincent, came recommended by my lawyer Buddy Harvey down at McCarthy and Associates. It's on 5th Street. Vincent's office was in one of those old brick buildings downtown, 3rd floor, with frosted glass on the door that just said investigations. The place looked like something out of an old detective movie metal desk, filing cabinets, Venetian blinds on the windows. Cost me $200 a day plus expenses, but I needed to know the truth. Vincent was a former Pittsburgh PD detective about 50 years old, looked like he could blend in anywhere. Professional, no nonsense, the kind of guy who'd seen everything twice. Just follow her, I told him sitting across from his desk in that cramped office. Document everything. I need to know what my wife is really doing during those weekend client meetings. I felt like I was betraying Helen even as I said it, but something was eating at me from the inside. The first report came back exactly 1 week later. Vincent had followed Helen to the downtown Marriott on Saturday afternoon. The hotel lobby is all marble and brass, the kind of place where business deals get made and expense accounts get charged. She met a man in the lobby bar, tall, well-dressed, expensive German car in the parking garage. They talked for about an hour over drinks, then went upstairs to a room together. Room 412, Vincent noted in his report. They came back down 2 hours later, kissed goodbye in the parking lot, like they'd done it 1,000 times before and went their separate ways. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach by a sledgehammer. My Helen, my wife of 25 years, the mother of my children, was cheating on me. But Vincent wasn't done with his report. Mr. Pierce, he said when I met him back at his office the following Tuesday, there's more you need to know. I ran the plates on the guy's car, a BMW 7 Series, by the way. His name is Marcus Bradford. He's a big-shot property developer around here. Married, worth about $50 million according to public records. Lives in one of those mansion estates up in Sewickley Heights. And here's the kicker. Your wife's real estate company has been handling several of his property deals over the past 2 years. The pieces started falling into place like a house of cards collapsing. Helen's sudden success in real estate over the past couple years. The mystery money showing up in our accounts, the secret phone, the Saturday afternoon client meetings. She wasn't just cheating on me, she was mixing business with pleasure in a way that probably wasn't legal. But I needed more evidence before I could do anything. Vincent suggested we put some recording devices in Helen's car and maybe her home office. Completely legal in Pennsylvania, as long as it's your own property, he assured me. We also set up surveillance on the house for when I wasn't there, a small camera hidden in the oak tree across the street that had a perfect view of our driveway. Over the next month, Vincent and I collected enough evidence to fill 3 filing cabinets. Helen and Marcus were meeting twice a week, sometimes at the Marriott, sometimes at the Hilton out near the airport, sometimes at properties she was supposedly showing to other clients. The recordings from her car revealed phone calls where they talked about their special arrangement and how much money they were making together, not just from his legitimate real estate deals, but from something else entirely. That's when Vincent brought in a forensic accountant friend of his. A guy named Al, who specialized in financial fraud cases for divorce attorneys and insurance companies. His office was in a converted warehouse in the Strip District, all exposed brick and computer equipment. We gave him copies of Helen's bank statements and business records that I could access legally as her husband. What he found made my blood boil like molten steel in the mill furnaces. Helen hadn't just been having an affair. She'd been skimming money from real estate transactions for the better part of 2 years. Not huge amounts from any one deal, but a little here, a little there, over dozens of transactions. Inflated closing costs, phantom inspection fees, padded attorney charges. The total was around $180,000. Money that should have gone to the real estate company or the clients, but instead went into secret accounts that Helen had opened using only her maiden name. It's called real estate fraud, Al explained, showing me spreadsheets that made my head spin. She's been manipulating closing costs, inflating fees, and pocketing the difference. Marcus Bradford's been helping her by using his properties for fake transactions. They're both looking at serious jail time if this gets reported to the authorities, but the worst revelation was still coming. During one of the recorded phone calls between Helen and Marcus, she mentioned something about Michael that made my blood freeze in my veins. I was sitting in Vincent's office listening to the recording on his equipment when I heard it. "I can't believe he looks so much like you," Helen said to Marcus. "Sometimes when Charlie looks at him, I wonder if he can see it. The resemblance is getting stronger as he gets older." The room started spinning. I made Al run a DNA test, even though it cost me $400 I couldn't really afford. Used hair samples from Michael's bathroom and my own saliva sample. The results came back exactly 2 weeks later, and they destroyed everything I thought I knew about my family. Michael wasn't my son. After 28 years of thinking he was mine, raising him from a baby, teaching him to throw a football in our backyard, paying for his college education at Penn State, being proud when he got his first job in construction management, he wasn't mine. He was Marcus Bradford's kid. I found out later from more of those recorded phone calls that Helen had gotten pregnant during a brief separation we'd had back in 1996. We'd been having some marriage troubles. Nothing major, just the usual stuff about money and work stress, and we decided to take a few weeks apart to figure things out. I'd moved into a cheap apartment near the mill while Helen stayed in our house. We'd worked things out after about 6 weeks and got back together, and when Michael was born 8 months later, I never questioned it. He was a little early, but babies come when they come, right? Wrong. Helen had been sleeping with Marcus even back then. They'd met at some real estate conference, and when she got pregnant, she made the calculation that it was better to let me think Michael was mine rather than blow up both their marriages and her budding real estate career. So she came back to me, we reconciled, and I raised another man's son for 28 years without knowing it. I sat in my truck outside the steel mill for 2 hours after getting those DNA results, just staring at the papers in the parking lot where I'd parked thousands of times before. The place where I'd worked my entire adult life suddenly felt foreign to me. My whole life felt like a lie. The son I'd taught to drive in the empty lot behind our house. The kid I'd walked down the aisle at his wedding ceremony last year. He wasn't mine. Helen had stolen 28 years from me and robbed Michael of knowing his real father. That's when I decided to stop being the victim and start being the hunter. I called Harvey, my lawyer, and arranged to meet him at his law office the next morning. Harvey's been practicing family law for 30 years, and his office reflects it. Walls lined with law books, mahogany desk, family photos of his own kids and grandkids. When I laid everything out for him, the affair, the fraud, the paternity lie, all the evidence Vincent and Al had collected, his eyes lit up like he'd struck oil. "Charlie," he said, leaning back in his leather chair, "we're not just talking about divorce here. Your wife has committed multiple felonies. We can destroy her legally and financially, but we need to be strategic about this." The plan Harvey outlined was simple but devastating. First, we'd file for divorce and use all the evidence to ensure I got the majority of our assets. Second, we'd report the real estate fraud to the state licensing board and the district attorney's office. Third, we'd file a civil lawsuit against both Helen and Marcus for the stolen money and emotional damages. Fourth, we'd report the unreported income to the IRS, who don't mess around when it comes to tax evasion. But before we pulled the trigger on any legal action, I wanted to do one more thing. I wanted to tell my kids the truth before Helen had a chance to spin it her way or disappear with whatever money she hadn't already stolen. I called Patricia first. She lives in a nice apartment complex about 15 minutes from our house. Works at a dental practice in the same medical building where she went to the dentist as a kid. We met at the Olive Garden where we used to take the family for birthdays when the kids were small. The restaurant still had the same red checkered tablecloths and breadstick baskets, but everything felt different now. "Dad, what's wrong?" she asked as soon as she sat down. "You sounded really upset on the phone." I showed her some of the photographs Vincent had taken, played her one of the clearer recordings on my phone with earbuds, so no one else could hear. "Patricia's a tough kid. You have to be in the medical field," but watching her face crumple as she realized what her mother had been doing was one of the hardest things I've ever experienced. "How long has this been going on?" she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "At least 2 years that we can prove, maybe longer." She cried for about 10 minutes right there in the restaurant booth, and then she got angry. "What are you going to do, Dad?" "I'm going to make sure she pays for what she's done to me, to you kids, to our family." Dennis took it differently when I met him at the sports bar near his apartment the next evening. The place was crowded with young guys watching college basketball, drinking beer, acting like they didn't have a care in the world. Dennis got quiet, really quiet, like he was processing everything I'd told him in slow motion. "I always wondered why Mom was gone so much," he said finally, staring at his beer bottle, "and why she was so secretive about her phone. I just thought it was normal for real estate agents. Both Patricia and Dennis promised to stand by me whatever happened. They were adults," they said, "and they could handle the truth. But Michael was going to be the hardest conversation of my life." I met him at O'Malley's pub after his shift ended on a Thursday evening. It's the kind of blue-collar bar where construction workers and mill guys go to unwind, dim lighting, worn wooden bar stools, Steelers memorabilia covering every wall. Michael looked tired after a long day on a job site downtown, his work boots still covered in concrete dust. "Dad, what's this all about?" he asked, sliding into the booth across from me. "You sounded really serious on the phone." "Son," I said, and the word felt strange coming out of my mouth now. "I need to tell you something about your mother and me, and about who your real father is." He didn't believe me at first. Called me crazy, said I was making it up because I was angry about something. So I showed him the DNA results, the photographs Vincent had taken of Helen and Marcus together, played him one of the recordings where Helen talked about him looking like Marcus. Michael went white as a sheet. He stared at those papers for what felt like 10 minutes without saying a word. The sounds of the bar, pool balls, clicking, people laughing, the TV broadcasting some game, fading into background noise. Finally, he looked up at me with eyes that were wet and confused. "Dad, I'm so sorry, I had no idea." "You've got nothing to be sorry for," I told him. "You're still my son in every way that matters, but you deserve to know the truth." We talked for another hour about what this meant, about Marcus Bradford, about the legal action I was planning to take. Michael was hurt, confused, angry at his mother for lying to him his whole life. But he also made it clear that as far as he was concerned, I was his father regardless of what any DNA test said. The legal assault began on a Monday morning in March. Harvey filed the divorce papers at the Allegheny County Courthouse at 9 a.m. sharp. By noon, Helen was served at her real estate office in front of all her colleagues by a process server who looked like he'd stepped out of a law enforcement catalog. I wasn't there to see it, but Vincent had positioned himself across the street with a camera to document her reaction. She went pale, he told me later, and locked herself in her office for the rest of the day. By Tuesday morning, Harvey had filed complaints with the Pennsylvania Real Estate Commission about Helen's business practices, complete with copies of all the evidence Al had compiled showing the fraudulent transactions. The commission doesn't mess around when it comes to license violations, especially ones involving theft. By Wednesday, we'd submitted a detailed report to the IRS about Helen's unreported income from the skim transactions. The federal government takes tax evasion seriously, and $180,000 in unreported income was enough to get their attention real fast. By Thursday, the district attorney's office had opened a criminal investigation into the real estate fraud. Harvey had hand-delivered our evidence package to the white-collar crime unit, and they were interested enough to assign a detective to the case. By Friday, we'd filed civil lawsuits against both Helen and Marcus Bradford for fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The amount we were seeking was $350,000 minus the stolen money plus punitive damages. Helen tried to fight it at first. She hired Reynolds, Goldberg & Associates, one of the most expensive law firms in Pittsburgh. Their offices take up 3 floors of the tallest building downtown, all glass and marble and hourly rates that would make a steel worker's head spin. She denied everything at first, claimed I was making it all up because I couldn't handle her professional success. Her lawyer even suggested I was having some kind of midlife crisis and was imagining things, but the evidence was overwhelming. Vincent's photographs showing her going into hotel rooms with Marcus, the audio recordings of their phone conversations discussing the money in their affair, Al's forensic accounting showing exactly how the transactions were manipulated, the DNA test proving Michael wasn't my biological son. They had nothing to counter with except denials and excuses. Marcus Bradford tried to distance himself from the whole thing when the lawsuits hit. His team of corporate attorneys, probably costing him $500 an hour, each claimed their relationship was purely professional, that any personal involvement was minimal, and that he had no knowledge of any financial irregularities. But Vincent had photos of them in hotel rooms, and Al had financial records showing the fake transactions they'd coordinated. Marcus's wife, a socialite named Jennifer who'd never worked a day in her life, filed for divorce 2 weeks later when the story hit the local business journal. The real estate company where Helen worked, Pinnacle Properties, fired her immediately when the state investigation became public. They couldn't afford to be associated with fraud, especially when several of their biggest clients were threatening to sue over the manipulated transactions. Helen lost her real estate license within a month. The commission moved fast when they had evidence that clear-cut. The criminal case moved slower, like they always do, but the divorce was final within 6 months. Pennsylvania's no-fault divorce laws meant we could move quickly once we had all the financial disclosure sorted out. I got the house on Maple Street, the retirement accounts I'd been building for 32 years, and most of our savings. Helen got a legal bill that probably cost more than my annual salary and criminal charges pending trial. The civil lawsuit against her and Marcus was settled out of court 8 months later, We recovered $285,000, most of the stolen money, plus interest and legal fees. Their attorneys knew they couldn't win at trial with the evidence we had, so they convinced their clients to settle rather than risk a jury verdict that could have been much worse. Helen's living in a small apartment in a rundown complex across town now, working part-time at a department store in the mall where Patricia used to shop for school clothes. She's facing 3 to 5 years in state prison if the criminal case goes to trial, though Harvey thinks she'll probably take a plea deal for probation and restitution. Her fancy real estate career is over forever. You can't get licensed to sell property when you have fraud convictions. Marcus Bradford's business empire took a major hit when the scandal broke. Several of his investors pulled out when they learned about his involvement in the fraud scheme. His construction projects around Pittsburgh slowed down, and some of his development deals fell through when banks got nervous about lending to someone under criminal investigation. He's still wealthy. $50 million doesn't disappear overnight, but his reputation in the real estate community is finished. As for me, I'm doing better than I ever expected. The retirement money is all there, plus the money we recovered from the lawsuit. Last month, I bought that fishing boat I'd always dreamed about, a nice 24-footer with a small cabin that I keep down at the marina on the Monongahela River. It's not fancy, but it's mine, and it's honest. Patricia and Dennis come out on the boat with me sometimes on weekends. We'll spend the day fishing for bass and catfish, talking about life and work and their relationships. Even Michael joins us when he can get away from his construction projects. He's still my son regardless of what that DNA test says, and he knows it. The hardest part about this whole thing wasn't the money or even finding out about the affair. It was the lying. 25 years of marriage, and Helen had been lying to my face every single day. About the money, about Marcus, about Michael's parentage, about who she really was underneath all those smiles and family dinners. But here's what I learned. When someone betrays you like that, the best revenge isn't getting mad, it's getting smart. I could have confronted Helen in a rage, maybe done something stupid that would have landed me in jail instead of her. Instead, I gathered evidence, hired professionals, and let the legal system do what it's supposed to do. Helen played me for a fool for 25 years, but in the end, I got the last laugh. She lost everything, her career, her money, her family, her freedom. And me? I'm 58 years old with a paid-off house, a healthy retirement account, and the knowledge that justice was served. Sometimes when I'm out on the boat at sunset, watching the water reflect the Pittsburgh skyline, I think about those 25 years. Were they all a lie? Maybe some of them? But I've still got years left alive, and I'm going to live them honestly. That's more than Helen can say. Trust is like steel. It takes years to forge, but one crack can shatter the whole structure. The difference between a fool and a wise man isn't how much he trusts, but what he does when that trust gets broken. I spent 25 years building a life on someone else's lies, but I'm not spending my remaining years living with their consequences. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even, it's getting free.